Okay, let's dive into the chilling case of a man who managed to hide a monster secret behind the friendliest of smiles. You see, on the surface, he was a successful businessman, a community volunteer, and yes, even a children's party clown. But beneath that facade was one of the most prolific serial killers in American history.
It's the question that's haunted everyone for decades, right? How did he do it? Well, in this explainer, we're going to break down the complex case of John Wayne Gacy. We'll trace that final investigation that finally unmasked the man behind Pogo the Clown and brought his reign of terror to a screeching halt. The beginning of the end for Gacy really started with just one disappearance. But this time was different. See, unlike so many of his other victims who were runaways or disconnected from their families, his final target was a 15-year-old boy who was immediately and desperately missed. So picture this. December 11th, 1978. Robert Peast vanishes from the pharmacy where he worked. He'd told his mom he was just stepping out for a minute to talk to a contractor about a summer job. Now, here's the crucial part. The Des Plaines police, to their immense credit, didn't wait. They waived the usual waiting period for missing persons, and within just 24 hours, they'd identified that contractor as John Gacy and put him under immediate scrutiny.
And this, right here, gets to the heart of why Gacy was so hard to catch for so long. Before he was a suspect, John Gacy wasn't just some random guy. He was a pillar of his suburban Chicago community, a real stand-up citizen. Or so everyone thought.
I mean, just look at this resume. He ran his own successful construction company. He was politically active, serving as a Democratic precinct captain. He even directed Chicago's big annual Polish Constitution Day parade. And, of course, the one everyone remembers, he was a beloved local entertainer, performing as Pogo the Clown at kids' parties and charity events. His public life was so convincing, his connections so strong, that he actually got security clearance to meet and be photographed with the First Lady, Rosalind Carter. That picture, with him wearing a Secret Service pin, well, that later became a huge source of embarrassment for the agency. It just goes to show how deeply he had fooled everyone.
This quote, wow, it just perfectly reveals the horrifying double life he was leading. After Robert Peast disappeared, the police put Gacy under 24/7 surveillance. He absolutely knew they were following him, and in this moment of pure arrogance, he turns to the very officers tailing his every move and says, that. Chilling.
So behind that public mask and those taunting, creepy jokes, there was a meticulous and truly sadistic predator who had perfected his methods over many, many years. Gacy had a system, a modus operandi. All his known murders happened inside his home on Summerdale Avenue. He developed this routine to overpower his victims, literally using their trust and the privacy of his home as a weapon against them. His targets were almost always young men and boys, many of them vulnerable and just looking for a job. This four-step process was his terrifying signature. It would start with the lure, getting his target to the house. Then, he'd often show them what he called the handcuff trick, pretending it was just some magic routine before snapping the cuffs on their wrists. Once they were helpless, he would assault and torture them. And the final act was what he chillingly called the rope trick, using a rope and a stick as a garrote to strangle his victims. So as the police surveillance kept going, the pressure was mounting. They knew Gacy was their guy. They needed hard evidence to get inside his house for a much more thorough search. And a single, almost forgotten clue was about to expose the absolute horrors hidden at 8213 West Summerdale Avenue. So what was it? Police, digging through Gacy's garbage, found a photo lab receipt. It belonged to a coworker of Robert Peast, who remembered putting it in the pocket of the jacket Peast was wearing when he left to meet Gacy. This tiny piece of paper was the key. It completely blew up Gacy's story and gave the police the probable cause they so desperately needed to go back inside. On December 21st, 1978, armed with that new warrant, police went back. An evidence technician crawled into the cramped, foul-smelling crawl space, and within minutes, he shouted up to the investigators, "I think this place is full of kids." They would ultimately unearth the remains of 29 victims buried right there in shallow graves under the floors of Gacy's house. Faced with the undeniable, horrific evidence being pulled from under his own home, Gacy finally confessed. And he did it in this calm, methodical way, admitting to murdering around 30 young men. He even provided investigators with a hand-drawn diagram of his personal graveyard, mapping out where he'd buried many of the bodies. So, with the bodies discovered and a confession secured, the case moved from investigation to prosecution. But even with the killer caught, believe me, the story was far from finished. Gacy's crimes would continue to send shockwaves for decades to come. At his trial, Gacy's legal team argued he was not guilty by reason of insanity. They presented him as a man with multiple personalities, a kind of Jekyll and Hyde character, driven by compulsions he couldn't control. But the prosecution? They painted a very, very different picture. They argued that the careful planning, the luring of victims, and the elaborate concealment of the bodies were all proof of a sane, calculating killer who knew exactly what he was doing.
The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. In March of 1980, they found him guilty on 33 counts of murder. Gacy spent the next 14 years on death row filing appeals before he was finally executed in 1994. But for law enforcement, this case has never really closed. In 2011, it was officially reopened, this time using modern DNA technology to finally give names to his unknown victims.
Even decades after the crimes were committed, that work continues. Advances in forensic science have helped identify several victims, including one man, Francis Wayne Alexander, in just 2021. And yet 5 of John Wayne Gacy's 33 victims still remain unidentified, leaving families out there somewhere with questions that might never, ever be answered.
The Gacy case really forced society to confront an uncomfortable truth. Evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like your neighbor, a local businessman, or even a friendly clown. And it serves as this haunting reminder that the most terrifying threats can come from the people you would least expect.